Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. We're gonna start explaining a the Marshall-Lerner condition plus the J curve. Okay, let me write this. The Marshall, hold up, Marshall-Lerner condition and the J curve. So before we start, I want to begin with discussing a current account deficit. Okay, when there is a current account deficit, what's gonna happen? Ask yourself right now, what's gonna happen? So we know that CA account deficit is when there's more import than export, right? So we can know that from a CA deficit, import is greater than export. When your import is greater than export, what are you going to do to your currency? Well, when you are importing more than you're exporting, you are supplying more of your currency into the foreign exchange market, right? So then that makes the supply shift to the right, right? So that's going to drop your exchange rate from P1 to P2. So there's a decrease. So this is the 4x market. Okay. And then your supply shifts to the right. So then there's a price decrease causing a depreciation. Okay. So the basics of the Marshall-Lerner condition and the J curve starts from a CA deficit, current account deficit, which leads to more import than export. Okay. Import is bigger than export, which will lead to a depreciation. Okay. So when there's a depreciation, what is going to happen? Ask yourself again, pause the video. What's going to happen when there is a depreciation? Okay, so we know that depreciation means that our currency price is dropping. So our domestic currency is cheaper, right? When this happens, export will become cheaper for foreigners. Why? Because because the foreigner can buy more of our currency with their currency, making them buy more of our export. And because, okay, let me bold it. Let me bold the export part. Oh, wait, export will become cheaper. Okay, so because our depreciation, what's going to happen to our import when domestic currency is cheaper? Import is going to be more expensive, right? Because the purchasing power of our currency has dropped. So then in order to buy goods from a foreign country, we need to pay more. So import becomes more expensive to buy because our currency, domestic currency, is worth less, is worth less now, right? So this is what's going to happen. So export is going to be cheaper, import is going to be more expensive. Well, when these two things happen, it can either lead to more export being sold to foreigners and less import being consumed, or it can lead to not much change. Okay. And then this can be resulted because of the elasticity. Okay, so hear me out. Let's assume that the export and import are both elastic. Okay, what does elastic mean? Elastic means that the PD, the price elasticity of demand, is greater than one. Okay, so when export and import are both elastic, what's going to happen? Well, we know that for goods that are elastic, right? Elastic goods means that when there is a price change, so when the good is cheaper or more expensive, when the good is cheaper or more expensive, we will see a pro proportionately greater change in quantity demanded. So what this means is that if the price of, for example, the price of a elastic good decrease by 20%, so the good is cheaper, right? The good is cheaper. What's going to happen for the consumers? Oh, the consumers are going to see, oh, the goods are cheaper. Let's buy it more. But with elastic good, we're going to see that when the price drops by 20%, the QD the quantity demanded is going to increase by greater than 20%, so 30%. Okay, so we're going to see a 30% increase in quantity demanded. Similarly, for elastic good, okay, let me just make sure that you understand that this is for elastic good. For elastic good, when price increases, so this is cheap. Wait, this is cheaper. Okay, and then if the price of the good increases, it becomes more expensive. Hold on, it's more expensive. Then we'll see that when price drops, when price increases, right, more expensive, if the price increased by 20%, so the consumers are going to notice that, oh, the price of the good is more expensive now, so let's not buy it. So the quantity demand decrease for elastic, you're going to see a greater change than 20%. So 30% of more consumers are now going to buy this product because it's more expensive. Okay, this is for elastic good. Okay. So if we take a look, so now that we understand the elasticity, let's take a look at the export and import. When export is more elastic and import is also elastic, for export, we said that export will become cheaper, right? So when export becomes cheaper, what's going to happen? We're going to have way more people buying our export. When import becomes more expensive, we're going to have way more people not buying our import. Okay. So what is this going to result in? Well, when your import and export is elastic, it means that more people will buy a lot more export. Okay. More people will buy a lot more export. And then a lot more people will buy a lot less import. So people will stop buying import and then people will buy a lot more export. When that happens, when your export is increasing by a lot and your import is decreasing by a lot, right? That's going to improve our current account deficit. Improve CA deficit. Okay. Okay, now let's take a look at the opposite side. Okay, let's take a look at inelastic good. In, why is it so small? Hold on, let me zoom in. Inelastic goods. So when we have inelastic goods, if the good becomes cheaper, so the price will decrease by, let's say, 20%. We will see a less percentage in quantity demanded. Okay. So cheaper price, obviously consumer are going to consume more, but then this more is less than 20%, so maybe 15%. Okay. And then when it's more expensive, let's have a look. Expensive. So when the price of the good increases, okay, by 20%, let's say. So when the price become more expensive, the consumers are going to consume less, right? But then this less is going to be a little bit. So they're not really consuming too little, right? They're still consuming the same amount. Okay. Inelastic good are like raw materials and electricity and like fuel, oil, right? Think about it. When we experience a more expensive electricity, we still need it, right? Regardless, we still need electricity because it's essential. We need it regardless of the price. So when there's an increase in price for electricity by 20%, we're still gonna consume a lot of electricity at a higher price, right? So if we go back to import being more expensive, so obviously import is more expensive, but people will still consume a lot of import. Export will be cheaper, but not too many people will consume a lot more export. So import cost, right? People buy more import. So import is going to increase by a lot more because the price are higher now. Export will also increase, but only by a little less, by a very small amount. Small amount. Okay. So when export only increases by a small amount and then import increases by so much, we'll have still worsened CA deficit. Remember, current account is what? Import, export, right? When we have a lot more import and only a little bit of export, we'll still be CA deficit. Okay? So this is what the Marshall Lerner is saying. Okay, so remember we started all the way here. Okay, we have a CA deficit. CA deficit led to a depreciation. A depreciation led to export being cheaper and import being more expensive. And then we move on to if it's elastic or inelastic. For elastic, people will buy so many more export when export is cheaper and will buy so much less import when import is more expensive. So it will lead to an improved deficit. Okay, improved deficit. However, when we have elastic good, uh, prices for import being more expensive will not affect the amount of import being consumed by too much, right? So people will still buy a lot of import. Export is cheaper now, but not too many people will buy cheaper export. So will lead to a worsened CA deficit. Okay. So now let's take a look at what the Marshall-Lerner condition is. The Marshall, okay, let me zoom in. Okay. So the Marshall-Lerner condition, hold on, states that a depreciation will only lead to a improved current account deficit if the price elasticity of import, so import plus the PED of export is greater than 1. Okay, so now pause the video, ask yourself if if the PED of import and export added together is less than 1, what's going to happen to CA deficit? Pause the video. Okay, so obviously, when we have a inelastic good where the PED, when the PED of export plus PED of, hold on, PED of import is less than 1, we will have worsened deficit. And that's the Marshall-Lerner condition. Okay. So if you are still confused a bit, watch the video again. If you're really confused, send me a text. Okay. So that's the Marshall-Lerner condition. Let's get into the J curve. Okay. So the J curve J curve is basically a diagram used to explain the Marshall-Lerner condition. Okay. So you need to learn how to draw this diagram. I suggest, right, draw this diagram 10 times tonight. Okay, so we start from here. So this is our y-axis. We have above the x-axis, we have CA surplus, so current account surplus. And then below, we have CA account deficit. And then in the middle, we have 0. Okay, and our x-axis, we label it as time. Okay, so the reason why it's called a J curve is because the J curve looks like this. Okay. Now let me explain why that is. Okay. So you see right now we are at a CA deficit. The curve starts with CA deficit. Right? The curve starts with CA deficit. We're below 0, so we're still in CA deficit. Below 0, all of this is CA deficit. Above 0 is CA surplus. Okay, so right now we're in CA deficit. As time goes by, we are moving. Oh, and we have a CA surplus. What is this called? Remember, we call this an improved deficit. Why? Because our import and export, PD import and export is elastic, is greater than 1, which will lead to improved deficit, right? So the J curve illustrates the Marshall-Lerner condition, okay? So let me write the reason the J curve looks like a J is because is because it started with a CA deficit, but because the PED of export and PED of import added together is greater than 1, we will have an improved, okay, I'm still recording, deficit. Okay. But you might have noticed that we have the time axis here. Okay. This is a little bit extra than the Marshall-Lerner condition. So the J curve is the Marshall-Lerner condition illustrated with time. Okay. So right now we have T1 and we have T2. Okay. So why between T1 and T2, sorry, between T1 and T2, we have deficit going even more down. So this means worsened deficit from T1 to T2, but after T2, we have improved deficit. Why is that? Okay, so let me write that down. T1 to T2, we have worsened deficit, but then eventually after T2, we have Wait, what is this? At T2, we have improved deficit. So why is that? Okay, so from T1 and T2, well, the problem is that we have a time lag. Okay, there's a time lag. So when the depreciation, remember, this is all caused by depreciation, right? We started with depreciation. When there's a depreciation, if the, okay, let's just start with depreciation. Okay, when there's a depreciation, the time lag says that, so from T1 to T2, there's a time lag. So during T1 and T2, consumers or foreigners are not likely to notice that export is cheaper, right? So they like in a very short time, they wouldn't know that the export is cheaper because of depreciation. So then, which means they will still consume the uh the more expensive option until they notice that the depreciation made the good, made the good, or made the uh, good cheaper. Let's just call it make the good cheaper. Okay. So this is between T1 and T2. What about the producers, right? So during between T1 and T2, producers, what they are doing is that they're buying import. Okay, they're buying import. Maybe producers have signed a contract with import partners. So remember, after depreciation, right? After depreciation, our import price is increasing. So we have more expensive import. When the import is more expensive, well, normally what producers would do is nor normally when import is expensive, producers will change their uh change or will maybe stop, okay. They will maybe stop importing or import less, right? But most of the time, these producers have a contract with who they are importing from. So this contract is going to say that uh, the contract may say that in the next 3 months, you need to import from us. Or the producers may have already paid the imported good, or the producers may have already paid for the imported good for like 3 months worth of imported goods. So they cannot switch away, right? They cannot the producers cannot do the normal way and stop importing. They have to keep importing from T1 to T2. Okay? So what this is going to do, right? Foreigners are not likely to notice export is cheaper. So then export after depreciation between T1 and T2 will not increase by a lot. Okay. So export, so again, we need to differentiate. This is T1 to T2 period. So export will increase by a little bit, and then import will not change, or import not likely to change by a lot. Okay. So import remains the same. So import remains the same. Export is export only grow by a little. So we're gonna have even worse current account deficit, right? So because import doesn't change, export only increase by a little, it's still CA deficit. However, after T2, okay, let's take a look. After T2, this is when, first of all, the foreigners, they start to notice. Okay, they start to notice uh the export is a lot cheaper from your country, right? So they're going to see that, oh, the depreciation has made your country's good so much cheaper. and they're going to switch after T2, after T2, foreigners will notice that your good is cheaper, which means they will switch to consuming your good. So you are going to export more. Okay? So this is when the Marshall-Lerner condition starts to happen. Marshall-Lerner condition, MLC. Okay, so this is when after T2 Marshall-Lerner condition kicks in, foreigner will start to notice that your good is cheaper. And then because your good is elastic, they will buy a lot of your good. So in this time, your export increased by so much. Okay. And then for producers, their contract end. Okay. Their contract end, they stop importing from expensive they start importing expensive, okay? Importing expensive goods and maybe switch to domestic good, right? To domestic good or raw materials. So import decrease a lot. Okay, so this is when also the Marshall-Lerner condition becomes true. So your import goes down by a lot. And if we remember, when export increases by a lot and import decreases by a lot, we're going to have a CA surplus or improved deficit. This is why after T2, we go from a CA deficit to a CA surplus. Okay? And this is the Marshall-Lerner condition and the J curve explained. What I recommend you to do, well, obviously, first of all, right, suggestions. Okay? Suggestions. First of all, for you, this is if this shows up on a paper one, okay? If show up on paper one, try to skip it, okay? Either way, if you know it well, still try to skip it because it's a hard question. It requires a lot of answering, requires a lot of thinking and explaining. Okay, even if you know it better than now, you should still avoid it. Okay, try not to do it. If this shows up on a paper three, right, on December 4th, most likely they are going to ask you first, explain Marshall-Lerner condition. Or they can ask you, draw the J curve. Okay. Not likely they're gonna ask you to explain the Marshall-Lerner condition with the J curve, because that's way too much, way too many marks. Okay. So to strengthen your understanding, okay, draw the J curve. You should draw this J curve right here that we just drew. Draw this J curve around 10 times, okay? Make sure you remember label T1, T2, this is time, and then CA deficit, CA surplus. Make sure you remember that, okay? Draw repeatedly around 10 times, okay? Make sure you remember it. So the Marshall-Lerner condition, again, let me give you the official definition. Depreciation, oh, wait, depreciation will only lead to improved deficit if the PD of import plus PD of export is greater than 1. Okay? And that's it. Ask me if you have any more questions. All right?